Hello, welcome to this video. Hopefully it's going to be better than the lesson. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things, well, a few things in this video. One mainly is the nesting function inside of Premiere, and it makes producing small graphics like the Frobisher graphic we're going to be looking at very, very easy, because we can then use this one graphic. I'll just mute these. We can use this one graphic multiple times, and we can actually basically pre-animate, pre-visualize that graphic, and then basically, if we want to reuse it over and over again, we just keep dropping it in different places rather than having to go back and redo the animation time and time again. And what it's also really good for is stuff like this. So I've made this super gaudy, like 80s animation. It's a little bit choppy because there's a lot of stuff going on. But what I've got going on in there is quite a few things. If I just turn everything off, I've got this background of these stars. I've got this haze, which is behind the mountains. I've got this parallaxing, or this moving ground. So I've just grabbed this ground that's moving. I've got this sun, which has actually got some animation applied to it, because here it kind of like has that like the bars moving downwards. Very, very stylish, very, very cool. We've got these mountains that move from side to side. As well as some front haze. And they all come together to make something that looks super atrocious. But part of this is actually created inside Maya. The mountains and the flooring is actually made inside Maya. It's super easy. Anyway, let's go back to the easy stuff first. So here, what I've done is I've just brought in this single image of this English canal. And it's quite a long image. I would love to have this as an actual video, because I'd love to have the trees moving and the water moving, and as the camera's moving, I'd like to have the interaction between the light here. But obviously we've not got that luxury, so we're using our imagination on this. But the idea is still the same. So I went over the graphical kind of theory behind what I'm doing here. I'm just making sure it's super clean, super simple, because it's meant to be a kind of like a something that's aimed towards the elderly or the upper class, kind of the canal excursion. So I want to make sure it's nice and clean and crisp. And I did something very similar, the exact same length as well. Both these animations, or both these sequences, are exactly the same length of time, and they're actually using the same audio underneath. This one is actually a video, which I didn't actually do anything with. The video for me is perfectly fine. I changed the audio. It's about the only thing I did was I changed the audio. But then I did something at the end to actually make the Frobisher logo just stick out a little bit more, rather than just going to a black screen. One thing I will touch on, which I didn't get to touch on inside the actual lesson, was how I actually got these black bars in. So obviously I can turn this off, this adjustment layer. If I turn this off, I lose them black bars. I get a full screen, and it looks all right. Everything works. Obviously this is broken, but everything works. But it doesn't look as professional. It doesn't look as situated as if we got these black bars, which are obviously more of a cinematic thing. But a lot of TV adverts have black bars, especially if they want to be more kind of like cinematic. Not much TV has black bars, but anyway, that's besides the point. All right, to actually make this is actually really simple, and I'm actually going to delete this and create it again. Now, what I'm going to do is come out of editing. I'm going to come to assembly, and I'm going to make an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go to File, New, Adjustment Layer. So it's going to ask me the parameters, and I'm doing this assembly, remember, and it's going to ask me my parameters. So I'm going to say this, cool. And then we get our new adjustment layer. I'm actually going to call this black bar. Ooh. Black bar. And I'm going to drag that onto my timeline. Drag onto my timeline. There we go. And I'm just going to extend this to as far as I need it to go. Like that. Super cool. So I can go back to editing now. That's been added in. And it's really simple to make the actual black bars because it's all inside my actual effects here. Now inside my effects, if I start adding, say, crop, I get transform and crop here. And this is a video effect. So I can actually bring this over and actually add it to here. And you can see here we've had this new cropped added in here. So, sorry, let me situate again. So I've added in that video effect to my adjustment layer. Now the reason I'm using an adjustment layer is because I can place this above everything else. The great thing about an adjustment layer is it's almost like a separate layer I could put on top of everything to control everything that's underneath it. So I can apply, say, on this here, on the 80s thing. I've done the same thing. I got the black bars, but what I've also got is a time code because I wanted to make it look a little bit more kind of like 80s, and this wave warp here, which is giving me this kind of subtle kind of screen tearing effect that happens once or twice through the entire thing. There we go. So there, just going across there, I've got a little bit of a screen tear, just to give the, you know, really basic VHS sort of decay, and that will affect everything below it. So that's really cool. So this adjustment layer, all I'm going to do is just use the black bars. I've added in the crop. I don't need to touch left or right from my top. This is where I actually start to bring in my bars. It's dead simple. As you can see, I can go right, drag this, and you can see I'm adding a black bar at the top, and I'm adding a black bar at the bottom. Now, I've read a couple places the, I guess, percentage you would use. I believe here I used 12 point, so here I've used 12.8. So inside the top and the bottom split, I'll just 12.8 and 12.8. Obviously you can use whatever you want on this. I just think this looks quite nice, and I see it being used quite a lot. I won't pretend to understand why, but it looks quite nice. And then that's literally my black bars. I don't have to worry. I can do anything I want underneath here, and it's going to look good. And what it also does is, you can see there, it also hides any sort of like faults or, you know. You can actually see as well, I've got something else on this adjustment layer which is giving me even more of that 80s vibe, and I can't figure out what it is. But I've added something to this where I've actually got it adds, I kind of really start to mess up the image a little bit and get it not quite as crisp. It's quite a bit dirty. It's somewhere and I can't for the life of me remember which one it is. Anyway, so let's talk about this nesting thing first. Let's talk about how I created this title. I'll come to the end because I've actually created the one like we created inside the class. I did it again here. So I'll delete this. I'll say I want to add it to, I'll add it to video 2 here. So I'll just lock off all the other video channels so they don't accidentally add it to any other channel. And to create a title, file, new, legacy title. And it's going to ask you what the width is, what the height is, the time base, the pixel aspect ratio, and the name. So I'm going to leave everything default besides the name. I'm going to call this Frobish 2. And here it is. So on the right, when we've got some text added in here, these are all the parameters I can change about it. Up here is some basic kind of like Word-esque controls like indentation, text height, text spacing, text leading. Here's some presets at the bottom, but like I said, these all look absolutely atrocious to me, so I'm going to ignore all of these. We've got some alignment stuff here. The center stuff is very, very nice. And then we've got general kind of like controls here. We even got some like elliptical and shape controls, but I'm just going to add a simple type tool. It don't matter where I add it. At first, I'm just going to add it here. I'm going to call this example test. So right there, we've got a piece of title. We've got a title added. Obviously, it's not in the best place. It's not necessarily the best text. So keep it on my left side here. I can rotate it if I want. That's not what I want to do. Here's some really cool stuff. So down here in alignment, I've got center, and I've got these 2 icons next to it. So this left one will literally center to the middle of the horizontal part of the screen, and center on the right will center to the middle of the screen. So if I can click, say, the center on the left, you see that it centers it to the middle. On the horizontal, center it to the right, centers it to the middle there. So that's good. On the right here is just a load of controls to actually change the visual parameters. Opacity, obviously just whatever. This isn't controllable, like animatable in here, but we can animate it obviously outside. We've got position, we've got width. Now I said in the actual lesson before is don't change the width and height because you're stretching the pixels of the actual asset. And unless you're working with a vector type, which the type is actually created through Bezier curves, and it will actually kind of, it won't pixelate, it won't kind of tear or anything because it's being produced by vectors. Don't mess with these at all. Rotation, obviously rotation. Properties, font family, these are all your fonts. Obviously you can change whatever fonts you want. Font style underneath is if the font does have additional styles. So let's go to something like Arial, which has many different styles. You've got a few different styles you can choose from, like regular, italic, narrow, bold, black. Font size, that's font size. Aspect is stretching it. This is similar to, well, it's very similar to this width and height. It is stretching text. This seems to do a better job of not distorting it, but it's still something I wouldn't necessarily mess with. If I wanted to do something like this, I would leave it until I'm animating in the normal viewer. And then, you know, a lot of this sort of stuff has stuff you can check out. So obviously the kerning is a separation between text, or text icon leading is separation between different lines. Tracking is basically like kerning, but it's taking it from the point, so I've got it indented to the middle or center aligned. So tracking is going to basically track out from the center. So that's quite, so you can do some fun stuff with that actually. But again, sort of stuff that I do inside of the editor. Okay. So if I go back to my bins. I've already pre-made some stuff here. Oh, not necessarily there. So I've got, where are my pre-made? Oh, they're in backgrounds, aren't they? Yeah. So here I've got my Frobisher canals, which is my big one. Actually, unmute a couple of these, so I'll need a few of them for this. So I've got my Frobisher canals. I've got my English canal excursions. And then inside my symbols bin, I've got the filigree that I want to use as well. So obviously it needs a bit change of that. So I can come in here and I can start changing, say, the scale of this. I'll bring it in like that. I'll bring it up. Maybe I don't like the position of these. Maybe these are a bit too high. I can change those. I'll move that down a little bit. Trying to work in whole numbers or kind of rounded off numbers. So what are you? Okay, yeah. So I will bring that to about there. Yeah. Bring down that filigree, which is the top. There you go. So I'm happy with that. But I don't want to be dealing with all these separate layers or separate tracks. So I want to have one track, which is just this. So I can just grab that. And if I just right click, so I'm just literally dragging a box over this, right clicking, and then I'm going to nest right here. What that does is it basically turns it into one unit. So it's asking me for a name here, so I'm going to go for Frobe Nest 2. It's my second nest for this. And it bumps it all down to a single track here. That's basically what I've done here. Now it's also very, very cool, and I could have done this previously on when it was 3 tracks, but what I can also do is I can animate the opacity of this and then nest that out. Literally nest the same track to nest it into, you know, it'll basically break down all the parameters down to, it'll default everything. So you'll still get the animation, but it'll be just this single naked track sequence. Now with that, I can obviously bring that around. I can change the sequence length. Ooh. There you go. I can change the duration there, so I can actually make it longer and shorter. I can do tons with this, and it actually gets created inside our bin now. Because I've done a bad job of keeping track of everything, this will be inside my... There you go. So this is inside my version. So it goes into the very top folder. But I can just drag and drop this into any folder that I want to. You see there my Frobisher. So yeah, if I want to now drag this off, I can bring in another one. And I've got 2 Frobishers on top of each other. So that's very, very cool. So you can see I've done the exact same thing here. I've just done, it does have a black background inside here, but it doesn't mean it's got an actual black background. It is literally, I can put this on top of, let's open up this. Let's unlock this. So in here it's got a black background, but that just means that it's essentially a blank background because I created it without any background. So now I can bring this into anywhere it's got a blank background. Pardon me. So it's super, super useful. And that's obviously really, really good if you're working on multiple different things that you want to use the exact same animation. So just getting back on track. So we looked at the black bars. So I use that in adjustment layer. If I go to assemble, make a new adjustment layer, brought that into there, use the crop visual effect on that, video effect to actually bring in a top and a bottom at 12.8%. There we go. I panned the camera on that one. And I just use the opacity to actually do the fade in and the fade out. I just use the opacity. So I grab that. So if I now just have a look at the here, so you can see inside my my animation timeline here, it's pretty simple. I've got my movement up here, so you can see it's still and then eases into a movement, pans across and then eases out of movement. And the same for my opacity. Now my opacity starts at 0 and then doesn't get 100% until here. You know, we're in the back fourth, the back fifth of the actual image. But I found that if I had basically a copy of, I had a 100% up here, and it got too bright too fast. And I thought for stylistic reasons, I'd just get rid of that, and I zoomed it in, and it seemed to work quite nicely. And if I just take a closer look at the actual timeline, I did just bleed over the Frobisher graphic a little bit, just so I'm not going completely black, then introducing the graphic. I'm actually blending them in together there. You can see that we've got both the blending in, because I just use the opacity animation keyframing it, just like I did with the image. I keyframed the opacity in, but I made sure that we still had a little bit of the image in the background as we're bringing in the Frobisher Canal logo. Held that for a number of frames, took it out. Now I like that so much that I decided to, on my second version, just use the exact same thing. And the opacity on this, the way I did the fade in, and then the slight darkening, and then the fade out, is done the exact same way that I did the fade in and fade out of the first canal video. Really, really simple. So you can see there that my timeline for this is a little bit different. I didn't do any positional stuff, so I didn't pan the camera or anything, because I quite liked the both the color keying and the motion of the camera on this video. So I left that how it is, but I wanted to get that nice fade in, fade out. So I actually brought this up to 100% fairly early because I wanted to have that nice rich sun on the wheat. Really, really nice. So yeah, 0 to 100, and then right here I'm bringing it down to 40%. And I'm actually keying it at the point where I want it to change as well, because I don't want to start. I don't want to bring, like, not have this frame here and then keying a 40% here, because it means that this whole thing is going to get gradually and gradually more darker, and that's not what I want. I want it to be bright for a while on this one. Like I said, I want to have that really nice bright effect. And I bring that down to 40% with the Frobisher logo over the top, blending in exactly the same way. Hold that for a while. And then I basically tried to twin the blending of both these going away. So these both went at the same time, essentially. Now, another way of doing this is if I get rid of all the timeline stuff for this, and I just have this as 100% the entire way through, I can bring in another graphic. I can bring in basically a layer which is just a black layer over top of this, and then use the opacity on that as well. I just do it in reverse. So I have it 100% at first, then I bleed it out for when I want to show the background, but then I'll bring it in up to 60% when I want to have the Frobisher logo, and then back up to 100% when I want them both to zoom to fade out. Graphics, new layer, rectangle. Oh, yeah, go on. You're not making it. There we go. Now, like you saw in the video, I'm not particularly friends with these, so I'm not going to try and use the functions here because they were not working well with me. But I'm just going to cover the screen, cover all my functions like that. Move my graphic timeline. So, because this is just a static image, I can actually drag both sides of the frame to decrease or increase the movement, or the duration. And all I'm going to do is just affect the timeline in the opacity. So, let's get my opacity 100%, and keyframe that. I'm going to bring it up into about there. I'm going to bring it down to 0%. And then where's my Frobisher? So that's my Frobisher. So I'm going to keyframe here, because from this point up to, say, this point, I want to have the transition from basically no black to the grey, basically the duller background. Put 60% in there, because that's obviously opposite to 40%. And then let's try that. So about there, I put another keyframe in for 60%. Move to the end of the animation and go to 100%. So we're getting the exact same results. just through a different method. Now here's where I can actually go into a little bit of the velocity stuff here, because you can see here I'm looking at my velocities, or the way it transitions from different stages, and it's all very kind of like linear. It's all a very straight line, and we don't want straight line. This is a nice, you see here, this sort of saying in the chat where it just kind of jumps in. That's too much. From like one frame to there is too much. It's too much. So I'm actually going to ease in and ease out each one of these, so it's a really, really slow transition, or as slow as I can get it. So dead easy to do. I'm just going to make sure I grab all the different keyframes. Grab you, right click, and then when I go to ease in, so now you can see we've all got the ease in, and then I'm also going to ease out. So you can see there, our lines are a lot smoother, and we speed in and then speed out. Oh, we kind of ease into the opacity, then we ease out of it, and we slowly ease back in and ease back out. So this is giving me a much smoother transition. And what I might actually do as well is drag this a little bit forward. Let's hold that black for a little bit. So now that animation is going to be a little bit smoother. Or the transition is going to be a lot smoother. Also, the great thing about that is because they are points on the animation timeline, I can literally grab them, the ones I want, and actually move them around. If I think that, oh, maybe that is not lining up well enough, I can move them around and I can get those lining up well enough. And that's going to take you a long way to do stuff as well, because so much of editing is, if you were working as an editor, is you're not going to go out and get the videos yourself unless you've kind of like obviously a self-employed editor or anything like that. You're going to be receiving video from a client, from a collaborator, or anything like that, and you're going to be editing that. And obviously, a lot of that is color correcting. A lot of that is making sure the right information is being shown on screen, and making sure your transitions, and if you need to do any, you know, on the basic, you know, we've covered everything that you can basically make a pretty good living from. Yes, you're going to get more work if you can do the whole fancy stuff, obviously, but to start, this is going to get you a long way. It's going to get you a nice portfolio. It's going to be able, even as presenting yourself, just knowing how to do this is going to give you a hell of a foot up on being able to present yourself. So that's using some quite simple kind of functions. We're using the black bars there, obviously, to kind of frame our cinematic shot a little bit more. It's actually working really well on this one, I think, with the black bars. We've looked into some nesting, so we've done some simple nesting with these two graphics here, which means, you know, I've got that in my bin over here that I've every time I need to use it, I can just drag it in. The next thing is this bit, making something that's really, really kind of ostentatious. Now, I'm going to play this. Hopefully, hopefully the audio is going to be picked up on this. Let's just give it a try. No, because the audio is not coming through. It doesn't matter. It's cheesy Japanese synth pop. But there's a couple of babangs, which I was going to go through inside the lesson. But you can see here we have got audio right there. Now it is being choppy as well. You can see here that it's basically telling me that this is going to be a bit choppy because it's having to do a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on inside here. A lot of effects being used. But let's have a look at what's actually kind of going down. We'll go from the simple stuff first and go down to the complex stuff. So my simple stuff is, let's mute you, is if I to get rid of them, is I've got a black. I've got a background that I found online. I literally just typed in Starfield on Google. I found something that was relatively the right sort of feel. I did a little bit of color balancing here. That's about it. That's literally all I've done. Obviously, I've got my black bars. I've got my time code that I've added onto that adjustment layer, just because I want this kind of gives me the feel of some, like, you know, VHS style thing. I got the other graphics here, which are quite fun. So I've got this graphic here, which started off as, if I go in and grab that, you can see here I've got the parameter of a shape and a Gaussian blur. So if I actually turn off that Gaussian blur, you can see the shape I'm working with. It's just a big blue block. Exactly the same way I brought in that graphic a minute ago. I just turned it, I filled it with this kind of cyan. And then I just applied a blur to it. Now that's going to go behind my my mountains, like that. It's going to give me a blur behind there. The other graphic is exactly the same thing, but in the foreground. There we go. Exactly the same thing, but in the foreground. So that's just a shape that I brought in. I applied a Gaussian blur. That was it. I did a little bit of change to the shape and stuff. And made it. I was messing with being like taller and kind of how much it. A little bit of, oh no, I turned the opacity. I had the opacity lower at one point. I did it much more like, I did it a lot subtler at one point. So they're the basic ones, and I just used the blur from the effects bin here in the video effects, not video transitions, Dave. Video effects. Or in fact, I could just type inside the search bar there blur, and it's going to narrow down all the blurs. So video effects, blurs and sharpen, my best mate, Gaussian blur. Now the other stuff, this is where it gets a bit complicated. I'll go for the simpler stuff first. Right, let's get rid of everything besides two things: the flooring and the mountains. So the flooring, let's make that a bit bigger, is just a moving surface. It's a slowly moving surface towards the camera. And that's made up of multiple tracks that have been brought together. Like multiple is the same thing on a loop, essentially. I made a looping animation. The other one, the mountains, exactly the same thing. So the mountains are literally just a bit of looping animation. Then again, I just brought in. Now I produced those inside Maya. So if I start booting up Maya now, I'll give you a quick kind of overview of how I actually produced them inside Maya. So inside Maya, they're simple. It's just a looping animation, and both of these were 15 seconds long, or 15 frames long, I should say, not 15 seconds. And the first one I created was the actual flooring, so the flooring actually kind of moving towards the camera. And that was really, really simple to make. I just made a single plane at first, made sure it fit to the grid. The grid just makes it a bit easier for looping the animation, so I made it a 24 by 24 width. Made sure it snapped to the middle of the grid, and then I gave it subdivisions of 24 by 24, so it basically matched the grid itself. And then I made 3 across and 2 up. So I just took this, duplicated it across both sides, like that. And then I did that. So that's literally what I did. Now the actual movement was created. I made it a little bit dirty. The movement isn't necessarily the cleanest. Oh well, the cleanest method of doing this. This is just a really simple way I wanted to do it. I had basically the same shape, same sized object, just a single plane, that I moved down to the bottom, like here. So I'm going to have my camera positioned here, looking that way. Now I want to make sure that I can basically loop the animation basically to a vertex. I want to make sure that at the end of these 15 frames, there's going to be a vertex in the same position. So the best way for me to actually do that is say that, and this is again the dirty way of doing it, but for me it was kind of like, well, that makes sense. So at first I was thinking, right, where do I, what vertex do I actually want to take this to? What line, what row do I actually want to kind of call the loop at? So I basically snapped to a vertex there, brought myself down to 15 frames on the timeline. Oh well, 16, but to make it loop, I didn't actually render out the 16th frame. So I did my first frame there. I went to 16, and I just snapped the entire lot to there, basically to the corner of this plane, and did a keyframe. So now the space of 15 seconds, 15 frames, it goes from here to here. Now, one thing I do have to do, and this is what animation's default is you have a default ease in, ease out. So it slowly starts and then slowly stops. Now for this, because it's going to be looping, I don't want that ease in and ease out, because it means I'm going to have this rolling, like everything's going to be going like the animation is going to be, it's not going to loop properly. So what I'm going to have to do is go to the animation timeline, graph editor, just find the parameter that's actually moving, and then hit my linear tangent here, like that. And now what happens is there's no ease in or ease out, it just translates itself from that frame perfectly. Now looking at this, you can obviously see where the loop is. But if, like for instance, a really, again, kind of a really awkward way of doing it is if you kind of hold your hand in front of your eye so that you're blocking off where the geometry ends around here, and play the animation, and try and ignore the scrub line, you shouldn't actually see where the animation ends. It should just be like a continuing animation. Now I set up like camera stuff. So I was saying to Toby before about think about your camera. All I'm going to use for this is an aim camera. So I'm going to use a camera aim, like that. And then just move my camera back. Make sure I can tell what's going on in my camera. Camera 1, there we go. Move it up. Turn on my thing. Get my resolution so I can actually see where the actual render is going to kind of crop out. Now I want to basically hide the bottom of this like line across here. I want to hide that. It's like that. Now don't worry about this bit up here cropping and snapping, because that's actually going to be hidden behind the mountains. I kind of like thought ahead about doing this. Now how I actually got the wireframe, stupidly simple. We're going to go to our old friend Arnold. So I'm going to add a new material to this. Go away. I want to add a new material to this. Arnold shader. But instead of using our normal shader surface, standard surface, I'm going to use a wireframe. So I'm going to click the wireframe. With a wireframe parameter, and we get a bit of a kind of indication what's going to happen here. I can also turn on my renderer, and then we can see what's going on here. So obviously it's not quite right. A couple of things are wrong here. One, it's triangulated, at least for the ground. I don't want the ground triangulated. So the edge type, I'm going to change that to polygon, so it's nice and square. And it's the wrong way around. So black is where the white is and white is where the black is. So I'm just going to alter these around like that. Now this black isn't going to act like a transparency map as well, because this is still physically geometry. It's actually physically got a black shaded to it, but this black area back here isn't actually going to show up because we're rendering these out as TIFF. And when we bring them all together, into a sequence, it's going to remember. It's going to kind of like see this background as a transparency, so I don't have to worry about this black background. The last one is just the line width. You know, this line width is just basically how thick do you want the lines to be when your numpad is working. There we go. So depending on what you want to do, you know, knock yourself out. And I literally just rendered that out. I went to my editor here. Well, actually, the one I actually put on the here was 150 frames, so it's a bit longer. It's a little bit longer. Oh no, sorry, no, that was the 150 frames was for this back here because of it was a long object. For this, yeah, it was 15 frames, so I went into here, image format, TIFF, frame and animation. It's going to be something that needs a number on it, like a hashtag. So I put it name _ hashtag, which is the padding number. Give it a name, so I call this floor. Give it my width and heights, and my ratios, start frame, an end frame, boom, and I went away. I didn't actually change anything of this. Well, tell a lie. I changed my camera AA to 5 and I turned off diffuse, specular transmission, subsurface and indirect because I didn't need them. Literally, I just want the black and white values. Now for the mountains, I did something very, very similar, except what I did is actually take this physical object, this actual thing, and this is a little bit more involved. It's, you know, it's a little bit more work involved, but I basically, I mean, the easiest way to do this actually is just to make a new piece of geometry, make it the same width and height, but then make it a 12 by 12, like that, because I don't need my mountains to be quite as dense as this, and you'll see why. Okay, so let's have that there. Again, I end up like changing the height and parameter stuff later on, but all I did was just make pretty much the same sort of beginning stages to this. Make sure it's in the middle of the world. Now the cool thing I did about this, with this, is I used a couple of different features to kind of get a nice, cool mountainous effect. One of them is just using the soft select function. So I went in here, just grabbed some random vertexes. I didn't touch any in the first 2 rows, or at least definitely not the first row. I want this first row to be on the ground here. Like I want that to actually touch the grid. The other ones, they're fine. So I'm going to grab a bunch. And if I press B for Bravo, you can see there I get this soft select. I basically get radiuses of what I can move. And if I start to move these, they'll kind of lift up in chunks. Aside from that, if I hold B, I can make them bigger or smaller. I can do that for a few things, so I might go through and just do that to a few of them. Make some bigger, make some smaller. Now, what I also did, the second thing I did was if I just look from the top, I'm going to grab everything again besides the front row of vertexes, because I don't want these vertexes to actually leave the ground. And I used the randomize function inside our transform control here. So inside my edit mesh, transform, randomize that, transform vertex, and then just move those up. And I can see there that none of the first row are moving, but everything else is moving. Some of it is a little bit messy. I've neglected to actually weld any of the edges together, but that's not an issue. So I can just go through and just sew these back together. It's not an issue. And in fact, the more kind of like random and misaligned some parts get, the better. I think one mistake I made from this, as you can probably see, is we've got a lot of straight lines going up. Sometimes you want to avoid that sort of stuff. So, sew all these together. This bit, yeah. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. I can't loop this at the minute, because if I bring this bit over here, you can see we've got a massive discrepancy between these 2 points. Now what I could do is literally do what I've just done there and merge these points together, weld them together. Or I could do what basically 2D animators have been doing for decades, centuries. And I'm going to split this whole thing in half down the middle. I'm going to grab all this section, minus those, and I'm going to basically detach it. I'm going to get my image, I'm going to split it in half. I'm going to bring one side over to the left and one side over to the right, like that. And then bring these parts back together, like that in the middle. And then do the welding thing on this. Now, the great thing is, this section here and this section here are actually going to be aligned to each other. So, obviously these 2 bits aren't, we can fix that. Go through, just, whoops, merge. So I'm just going to merge all these. Again, this is why having a lower number of vertexes on this section is a little bit nicer, because I don't have to do as much work, I don't have to do as much faffing around. Oh yeah, and just catch anything that has kind of left the deck. Just make sure we kind of grab those and make sure they're flat to the ground. So we'll get them like that, and like that. Boom, they're fine. So you can see now we've got some nice craggy information, and if I grab this whole thing, bring it over to here, it now lines up. I can do the same thing over here, so I can grab this, bring it over here. And that's exactly what I did. I made basically a 3-part lineup of this piece of geometry. There we go. Obviously, there could have been a number of different ways I could have done that, but I wanted loop to this. I wanted something to loop. So I just combine and merge all those together, and then I just did the exact same thing. In fact, I took the exact same material, applied it, but in this case, what I did is, instead of having it be also, one good thing about having, oh, actually I missed something. So before I actually go into doing that, this is fine, this looks okay, but there's one thing that's missing is height. One thing that we're getting from this, lots of good height, and that's just not me kind of going in and grabbing individual vertexes and moving them up. What I did is applied a lattice to this object. So I grabbed it, went to deform, and then I went to lattice. And I didn't actually change any of the parameters because I didn't need to for this. But you grab this, and this allows me to deform the object. But what it basically, you know, if I just go to lattice points, grab everything at the back, lift it up, scale it up. Then I start getting a much more dramatic sort of like mountainous line, but it's still loopable. Nothing's been misaligned, because all I'm doing is just changing the y-axis scale. And that gives me some nice height, and it kind of gives me depth. If I come back to here, I can change my camera as well, because I've already done the rendering for this bit. That's already in my project. I could change the camera to this. You know, looking like this and looking like, you know, moving my camera aim so it's in the top third, or moving it so it's in the bottom third, isn't actually going to change too much. It's not actually going to change anything. So I can do, to be neat and clean up, I guess I'll just do that. Gives me a nice headroom. And yeah, I just do the exact same thing with the render on this, except for this, I do actually change it to triangulate, because this is okay, but it looks a bit boring. So if I go to my attributes editor for that material, wireframe, triangles, I get a much more triangulated environment. It kind of looks a little bit more old school vector art, computer graphics kind of feel. And then I just render that out, and I bring it in as an image sequence into Premiere Pro. Now all I did in here was, if I can just come back to where they are, so you can see here I have a few different versions of them. But if I just bring in, say, like the original, so I'll bring in my original here. Bring it across. So that's my original render from Maya. Now to make the actual blue, and to actually make this sort of like feel, it's very, very easy. Number one, I just decided what color would this be. So I wanted blue because we've already got a lot of purple and we've got pinky red for the ground. So like, well, to fill the family up, I'll go for blue for the mountains. Dead simple. I just used an RBG color correct that's in our effect. It's not in the video effects. It's in video effects, but it's in image control. And I want to color balance. So bring that in, and I can just start tinting my object. So yeah, if I want that to be blue, I'll bring down both of these parameters, make it blue. I could also use the color correction, color balance, pretty much the same thing. There's a lot more control over that, but I think if you're trying to get flat colors, the image control color balance is going to be a lot easier. But if I bring this color balance up, you can see here we've got like the shadow variants of red, green, blue, the mid-tone, and the highlight variants, which again allows me to do the exact same thing. It just takes the highlight value will take the higher value of that color, tint it towards blue, the mid value of that color, tint it towards blue, the shadow value of that color, tint towards blue. I believe I did that in this one. Yeah, because I'm pretty much getting the exact same result there. But I could have done this with obviously the other one. Now to actually get the slightly kind of hazy effect to it, I took this and I literally just duplicated it up and up to the level, up to the timeline of the channel above it. If I hold Alt and then just click and drag up, I can duplicate it off. So now I've got two of the exact same thing. But what I'm going to do with this one is just apply a, I don't need any audio effects. So this has got audio on it. We can ignore that. I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur to this, but then just be a bit careful about the control. So make sure I've got that upper selected. Grab my Gaussian blur, drag that on. As you can see then, when I start to affect it, it starts to blur out. A bit bigger, easy to see. And then I can change my blend modes as well, so I can change like linear. Okay, it would help if I actually had that channel turned on. So now that's why it's working. So yeah, so that blur needs to be brought way down. Let's go to 5, yeah. So that's blurriness. Let's put that at 5. And my blend mode, we can just go through some of the blend modes to find out which one's going to work for us. Say overlay. We basically don't want to lose the color into the black, but we want to make sure that we're not, like this normal obviously is overriding underneath. So we want to make sure we can blend between the two. So we can go through, look at like linear dodge to add a little bit, bring down the opacity maybe a little bit. You know, there's all these things we can mess with. But because that's the same sequence, it follows each other. And I did the exact same thing for the flooring. So you can't see any of what I've actually done to this because of the nesting functions. So if I go back to the mountains we were just working on then, if I'm like, right, they're cool, I want to nest those together, I'll just grab them both, right click, go to nest, call it mount 2. That's my new nest, but it has no parameters we can affect to change any of like the blur and anything like that because we basically locked it in. So you can see that's what I've done for the mount 2 and the flooring 4 there. And obviously, like I said, we've got the two graphics. One which is the background haze, the foreground haze, the parallaxing mountains, and the kind of moving floor. So that's very cool. Now, as you can see, there is actually one last thing inside this scene, which is interesting. That's the sun in the background, and we've got these bars that are basically acting as like alpha maps essentially. So we're actually occluding some of that information. A lot of this sort of information actually made outside of Premiere Pro and actually made inside Photoshop or Krita, whatever you're using. For the background for the actual sun, I wonder if it should still be in the. There we go. So yeah, I'll bring that in. So my first graphic was this. This is my sun that I made inside of Krita, and that's all it is. It's just a unanimated PNG that I brought in as a graphic. And then the other thing I've got are the bars, and if you can see, put these in, and we will adjust levels. Where do you see these? Well, I'll bring them into somewhere where you can actually see them. So I'll bring them in. Yeah. There you go. So what these actually are just literally black bars. Now this is one of those things that I did a little bit sloppily. If I actually spent my time, I could probably produce something a lot nicer, but I didn't want to spend a ton of time doing this. It already took me enough time to actually get the alpha maps working on this. So what these are, if I just bring that in, scale it down a bit, like I said, oops, literally just, there you go, just some black bars. Go from a thicker one to a thinner one. So I get thicker at the top and it goes down to thin, kind of giving me that 80s vibe in hazy sunset. Now what I'm actually going to use these black bars for are as a matte, M-A-T-T-E. It's basically going to tell this surface, the yellow surface, that you can ignore anything that's got this black above it. Now it is actually a tricky process to do this, to get it set up at first, because it's a bit confusing. But if I make it, just so I can show this off, if I actually make a new sequence, let's make a new sequence. Oh. Yeah, there we go. And I bring in my sun, settings, and I bring in my bars. So both of these need to be nested. These can't be natural, like standard graphics. These both need to be nested graphics. A lot of stuff happens when you try and do it with like unnested graphics. It doesn't work. I think it kind of like takes into consideration all the different parameters that might have been changed. So let's move that up there. There we go. There we go. So if I scale this down, so first of all, what I want to do is just position this so it's in the right position, so I get the right effect. that. And what actually, just to make a point, I'll bring in I'll bring in a background so you can actually see, obviously, that it's working. You can kind of see where I got the idea here. I've literally just ripped off this image. You can see this 80s image. Literally ripped it off. There we go. So you can see what's going on here. We've got these black bars. Boom. Actually, those black bars might be wrong. That's better. So they're the black bars that I was using. See how much nicer. They go from thicker to thinner. Now, if I remember correctly, you have to put the black bars above the image you actually want to occlude the images from, because you've got to tell, basically here, the sun image, to ignore or kind of to see through, in this case, it'll be video track 3. So let's see if I can remember how to do this. So we need to make a track matte. I do remember that. I do know that. So if we go to effects now, we go down to keying. We want to go to track matte key and just drag that onto our sun. We've got a few different effects here. We've got a few different options here. We've got what we want to actually turn into a matte. So in this case, we want to turn it to video 3. So you can see there what happens straight away. It's actually using the black matte or the black bars to say only show the sun here. But what we want to do is the reverse. So what we want to do is actually change that to reverse. So boom, there you go. And I can just scale the width on that to make it a bit better. There we go. Now I actually had mine animated, and how I actually did that was a little bit of trial and error. I basically moved this down and then repeat it again. So here I moved it from, let's say I moved it a few, from my beginning to the end. So maybe that much. And that's repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. To get a bit more involved in what I actually did was hide this very top bar here. I made a mask over the entire thing that would hide the black bar. Go away, mask. And then when, there you go. There we go. Try to go back to the original one. Sorry, I'm going to be mixed up with this one. So we'll zoom in to this sequence. So you can see here I've got the bar appearing here. That's because there's actually a mask above this area here, which is just masking off this very, very top bar. What's happening is I'm trying, it's not perfect, but I've just got it lowering down, and then I basically loop the animation. So you can see where it loops actually, because there's a little bit of a single frame of like smear of black. You'll see it every now and then. There you go. There's one there, right there. Like that. So that's the end frame. And then what happens is the new frame starts, and it kind of looks like it loops the animation. Obviously, like I said, this is a very kind of like dirty way of doing it. There are obviously going to be, if we had access to After Effects, there are going to be much easier ways of doing that, because we can actually animate that and post it into Premiere very, very easily. But that's just basically getting a piece of graphic that we make in whatever editing software you want to, and literally translate it downwards over a number of pixels, over a number of timelines, over a number of seconds on a timeline. Now, the only other thing I kind of want to show you on this, and this is everything I've been kind of showing you here is obviously super related to just this here. It's the chromatic aberration around the sides here to kind of get that broken VCR effect. And you don't see the amount of work that went into it here because of the nesting. Every time I produced a new kind of like milestone on this, of any asset on this, I did a nest. And just to make sure that I've got that bit like kind of locked in. and then I worked on the next stage, as long as it wasn't anything to do with the actual kind of graphic section we were working on. As soon as those bars moving were done and I was happy with it, I nested the graphics together into a single nest, into a single kind of sequence. So yeah, the only other thing is the chromatic aberration. That was relatively simple. It's the same kind of thing as inside Photoshop. It's just a little bit more involved in here, tiny bit. So what I've got is I've got my sun. So I'll just do it on this graphic here. And inside my effects here, I will come down and I will get that image control, color balance. So we've got our red, green, blue channels here. And I'm just going to turn all but the red channel off on this one. Move it up and then move it up again. So I've got 3 of them. So this top one is my red channel. Second one here is going to be my blue channel. So I'm going to take red down to, sorry, my green channel. I'll take red down to 0. I'll take green up to 100. And then I go down to the bottom. Take red down to 0, put blue up to 100. And then I'm going to put each one to be linear dodge. So you can see things start to change now. Cool. So we don't see the effect of it yet because all the different frames are actually laid perfectly on top of each other. So literally what we've done is what happens on TVs, or especially old TVs, where we've literally got the 3 channels sat perfectly on top of each other, which then come together to make the actual color. But if I was to then offset the position, say I'm going to grab the top one, I'm going to offset that by 2 to the left. So it's going to be 358. You can see there we've got a little bit of movement to the side there. I'm going to take the bottom one. I'm going to move that to the right by 2, so that'll be 362. So now we've got the separation between the red channel poking out and the green channel poking out. So you can see that happening there. And then you could go really in depth with this, and then you could animate. You could spend some time and animate the position. So maybe the red channel like jits out every few seconds or anything. You know, there's tons of stuff you can do. You just got to think about what you want to do, think about what the actual movement would be, and then timeline it. It's relatively simple. It's quite simple actually. And like I said, I've got this warping animation here that I've got just kind of like streaming down, which is literally just inside the adjustment layer. Wave warp, and there are my settings for the wave warp. Obviously I've got the crop for the bar lines, and I've got the time code, and that's it. Like I said, this is obviously very kind of specific to this kind of imagery, but taking each one of those separate assets down and trying to break down to its most simplest form. So, well, okay, let's take these mountains, for instance. These are literally what we just produce inside Maya. Literally, it's geometry. If it looks like geometry, you could probably produce it as geometry and then just do a render out from that. And like I showed you before, it's so simple to produce that just through using Arnold and the wireframe shader and just making sure everything's black and white. And obviously with the wireframe shader, you're not going to have indirect lighting or anything like that. So it's going to be really easy to work with. Do a bit of color correct. Throw on some form of Lumetri preset or color correct to get the right effect that you want. Bring down the opacity, not the opacity, bring down the saturation a little bit. Tons of stuff you can do. You can create stuff like the haze. You can create that sort of stuff inside Photoshop, Critter, whatever, or you can actually create it inside here. Obviously inside Photoshop, it's going to be a lot more malleable, it's going to be a lot more controllable, but for something as simple as just a blue haze in the background and the foreground, that's all you really want. And then, like I said before, every time you make a new thing, you've got your sun or you've got your object, and you've got that part of the object or that part of the sequence working, and you're not going to be affecting the graphics anymore on that, just grab everything you've worked on. So for instance, I'm going to grab these 3 objects here. I can nest them all down into one. Give it a name. Nested. I can nest all these down here into one. Grab all these. Nest into one. Now everything's still there. The animation's still there. So obviously we can't go back and change any of the animation. But now we've got that whole thing down into one object, one parameter, one sequence. And what you've seen me do a couple of times throughout here is actually go to different timelines or different sequences. So you can absolutely go into something, create a sequence in here so it's nice and clean, nest that together, and then because this is all part of the same project, go back to your main timeline and bring it in. You know, not everything has to be made inside this one timeline. You can make it outside, bring it in. There we go. So there's so much you can do, and I could do videos upon videos upon videos about the different editing things you can do, but the best thing to do, just like when we've been doing these adverts or these renders for the watches, is what are other people doing? What is the style or the aesthetic that you're going for? What do they do in there? How do they use their lights? How can you boil that down to at least a simple, it might not look as good, but how can you boil that down to a simple version of that? And if that's starting to look in the right direction, how can you then add more to it? What else is happening? Is it a single light source? Is it a multiple light source? Is it a simple graphic? Is it multiple graphics? Who's the client? Biggest one. You know, is this type of graphic going to be good for Frobisher English Canal excursions? Or is this going to be better for Frobisher English Canal? Is this going to be good for a Fortnite streamer? Or is this going to be good for a Fortnite streamer? You know, it really does depend on your client, the type of work, and the output. But even just doing stuff like this, you know, if you give yourself a list of 10 mini versions of stuff. So you want to do something that's kind of this 80s style, which was popular. It's kind of still popular, but this popular 80s style. And then you want to do something that's super brutalist and minimalist and very, very bare. And you want to do something that's nice and calm. And you want to do something that's for kids. You know, you can do these little, how long is that? That's 19 seconds or 18 seconds for just this first section here. That's 19 seconds. That's a lot of time. But it's enough time for you to demonstrate, 1, your capacity to actually edit, 2, your emotional capacity to edit. So you're actually understanding, you know, what the project needs, what you're putting in, what you're not putting in. Your ability to create nice graphics. Obviously, if you're creating from scratch, you know, you can animate, like we looked at before, you can animate these coming in and then nest them, then, you know, all these different things. I don't know how much of this we're actually going to bring into the current project or the current brief, but we're definitely going to be using more of, especially this sort of stuff, the really kind of cool, heavy graphic stuff in the next kind of couple of weeks, few weeks. Just to do some really nice like motion graphic stuff. We're going to be looking at kind of this sort of sun level, this sort of level of difficulty of graphics a bit more. And hopefully, obviously, it won't be as kind of like internet problems as it has been today. So I'm going to get this rendered out. I'm going to get this uploaded. Again, if you've got any questions, send me an email. Don't sit there and go, oh, I've got to wait until Wednesday or Monday. Send us an email straight away. Because it could be something as simple as, oh, you've just not ticked this box or something. I make mistakes all the time, especially with field inputs like this, where I think, why haven't I got any of these working? And I completely forget that I've actually been searching for something. So you never know the thing that's going to be standing in your way. It could be super, super, super simple. So yeah, I'll get this rendered out and I will see you all very soon.